everyone. My name is Abigail. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the National Academy of Education, and I'd like to welcome you to the webinar on the NAEd Spencer Fellowship Program. Next slide, please. So as I said, my name is Abigail. I'm with NAEd, and I'd like to introduce Dr. Kris Gutierrez, who is the Carol Louis Professor and Associate Dean in the Graduate School of Education at UC Berkeley. She is also a board member at NAEd. She's also been a member of the NAEd Professional Development Committee, which provides strategic guidance over the fellowships. She's been a member of our retreat planning committee, planning the retreats for all of the fellows, and she has served on our postdoctoral fellowship selection committee. So I'm very excited to have Kris here. Hi, Kris. So I also just wanted to mention a couple tech notes. So if you have any technical issues, you can submit them through the Q&A box, and my colleague Mandy will work with you to answer any questions. And if you have any questions about the presentation, about the fellowship, throughout the course of the presentation, you can feel free to also submit those through the Q&A box. We'll answer questions at the end. And if we aren't able to answer your question during the session, Zoom will actually save the questions along with your email, so we'll be able to follow up with you afterwards. I also wanted just to thank all of our participants today. We're really appreciative of your time. Just to let you know who's in the audience. So the NAEd Professional Development Committee is committed to diversifying our applicant pool based on, region, discipline, racial, ethnic, methodological expertise. We really want to expand our outreach. So to do that, we actually ran an analysis of all of our applicants from 2017 through 2021, looking at the institutions that were sending applicants, the regions that were sending applicants, and comparing that list with a list of institutions of regions with eligible applicants. We noticed that there were really strong programs at institutions in Missouri, Texas, Georgia, and Arkansas. And so we actually reached out to campus leadership at institutions with eligible faculty and graduate students in those states. So on the webinar today, we have applicants for the postdoc and the dissertation fellowship, as well as some university administrators. So we really appreciate your time and thank you so much for joining us. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background. So the National Academy of Education, it's a membership organization of established education researchers. So we have 250 members from around the US and about 50 international members. We're the education version of the National Academy of Sciences. So our members are established. We have university presidents, we have a number of deans, and they hail from institutions like Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, Michigan, Illinois, University of Washington, you name it. And they also come from a broad spectrum of disciplines. That's something that's really important to NAEd and to the Spencer Foundation is funding and funding a broad spectrum of education research. So we have anthropologists, historians, we have members who specialize in literacy, curriculum instruction, you name it, we have a member in that field. So NAEd actually brings our members together to work on a variety of research projects funded by Department of Education, different foundations, the Gates Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, etc. So that's one part of our mission, is bringing these researchers together. The other part of our mission, where the fellowships come in, is really cultivating that next generation of education researchers. And so to that end, we administer 2 fellowships funded by the Spencer Foundation. So Spencer funds the fellowship and NAEd serves as the host organization. So NAEd is responsible for the administration, so the selection of fellows, our members select the fellows, and the administration of each individual fellowship. NAEd has administered the dissertation fellowship since 2012, and we've administered the postdoc fellowship since the early 1980s. So today we're actually going to walk through the eligibility for both fellowships, the award details, and the application process. Again, we really want you to keep in mind that Spencer and NAEd take a broad view of education. I've received several questions already from your colleagues via email asking, would I be eligible for the fellowship? 99% of the time, the answer is yes. So we want to make sure we really emphasize that applicants come from all fields as long as their research relates to education. Next slide, please. So eligibility for the fellowships, who can apply? So for the dissertation fellowship, it's open to doctoral candidates and graduate schools at U.S. institutions, U.S. universities. It is open to international students, but you must be enrolled at a U.S. institution. And it's really to fund the writing phase of the dissertation. So complete the dissertation so we're funding the writing phase, the last year of graduate school. Prior to beginning the fellowship, you would have to have your data collected and any other pre-dissertation work complete. You don't have to have that complete prior to applying because it's a long application cycle. But prior to starting the fellowship, you would have to have your data collected and your other pre-dissertation work, any comps, something like that, anything like that would have to be complete. The postdoctoral fellowship is a little bit different. That is actually for scholars who are at least 1 year out of receiving their PhD, EDD, or equivalent degree. So this year it's open to applicants who graduated between January 1st, 2015, December 31st, 2020, and that is a hard policy. There are no exceptions to that window. Applications for the postdoc fellowship, most applicants are assistant professors at a university, assistant tenure track professors at a university. They're able to be housed at U.S. institutions or international institutions. However, the postdoc fellowship is also open to scholars who aren't affiliated with the university. So we've had people from NGOs, from small nonprofits, from think tanks, as well as independent researchers apply for the fellowship, the postdoc fellowship. For each fellowship, you're not allowed to actually have concurrent funding for the same project. So if you're selected for either the postdoc or the dissertation fellowship, and for the dissertation, if you received an AERA award to support your writing, and the NAEd Spencer Fellowship, you would have to choose one or the other. For the postdoc fellowship, you cannot have concurrent funding for the same project at the same time. For the postdoc, we might have someone who has seed money for the data collection and then wants to use the postdoc for analysis and writing, and that is something we would allow. Again, keep in mind that we take a broad view of education. The proposed project must be related to education research, and the committee is really looking for applicants that have a demonstrated track record and demonstrated interest in education research. Again, we're looking to cultivate the next generation of education researchers. So we aren't necessarily looking to fund an economist who has a project a one-off project that relates to education. We look for an economist who has looked at education policy projects throughout the course of their career. Kris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just think that people should be clear. I should know that I do have a point. Oh, I should put my camera on. After a year of Zoom, you'd think you'd remember. So people often say, well, I'm in sociology, so I can't apply for this. I just want to underscore what Abby has said, and that is and I'll elaborate later, we do want people from different disciplines. The criterion is that you use your discipline to study issues that are relevant to education, right? So it's not just for people who are in education, but squarely people who have a research agenda that's relevant to education.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So the award details. So for the dissertation fellowship, if you're awarded the fellowship, you would receive $27,500 for one academic year to support the writing phase of your dissertation. So this year, the applications are due October 7th. Fellows will be notified in early May 2022. And then most fellows, I believe, would start June 1st, 2022, and take the fellowship through May 31st, 2023. The $27,500 is really meant to support you. Most fellows, I would say, use it for living expenses. We really want you to be able to focus on the writing, so you don't have to serve as a TA, an RA, you don't have to have a part-time job. You can really focus on your writing. That said, we do realize that people might need to supplement their income. Everyone's situation is different. And so if you are awarded the dissertation fellowship, you can work with the NAEd program officer to figure out how you might supplement that with a part-time job. I believe they cap it at 15 to 20 hours a week, but they'll look at that on a case-by-case basis. For the postdoc fellowship, one other note about the dissertation fellowship, in most instances, the money would go directly to the fellows. So we would send you a check at the beginning of your fellowship and the midpoint of your fellowship. So the checks go directly to the fellows. The postdoc fellowship is a little different in that it is a $70,000 salary replacement. So usually the funds for the postdocs are administered to the universities where they're housed. It's a salary replacement for one academic year buyout. So it's really 2 semesters. In the postdoc fellowship, you can take 2 semesters in one academic year or 2 semesters over 2 academic years. It's really what you work out with your dean and your department chair. And you do have to disclose that you have spoken with your leadership prior to applying. Because what we don't want to happen is that you're selected for the fellowship and then you can't get the time off. We really want to make sure that you're able to take the time off and use it well. And our team will also work with you on how to negotiate that time off when the time comes. The hope is that you can take the equivalent of 1 year of teaching, 1 year off of teaching, administrative duties, and focus solely on your writing. Next slide, please. So in addition to the fun, yes, Kris, sorry.
I wasn't sure I was going to jump in for this slide.
Yep.
Yeah.
Feel free.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to add one point. First, good morning, everybody. It's morning here in California. So I just wanted to add to Abby's point that this year I have 3 of our assistant professors who have the Spencer postdoc, and they took theirs over a 2-year period. So they had some responsibilities 1 year and then others the second year, which actually can be strategic if you're going to build relationships and come up for tenure. It's all institutionally decided. But one of the things I made sure of this year as the new associate dean was really protecting them so they could take that time off and not giving them service and teaching opportunities so they could take advantage of this wonderful fellowship. So just know that this should be very carefully institutionally negotiated to make sure that you have the opportunity to benefit from the, from the fellowship. So Abby, do you want me to go ahead and go through these?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
So I have to say, the Spencer National Academy thing was just instrumental in my own life. I didn't go to an elite institution. I come from a small mining town in Arizona, 4 generations there. And so the opportunity to be part of and this was even before I was in the National Academy, of course, just to be part of this professional opportunity. Let me just say what you get with it, which is why I encourage so many of you to apply. You're really joining an academic family. It becomes a family. So, a lot of opportunities, you get a fellowship and you say thank you and you do it. This is not that way. You meet so many people who become so instrumental to your life. Because you're part of a network that's interdisciplinary, a network that's intergenerational. So that's why it's so critical. Later, you get job opportunities, you find letter writers, you really are joining a professional family. And that's why the activities that were developed are so central to that experience. You will be invited to, in fact, you're required to attend 2 professional retreats in the fall and the spring. And what's wonderful about these, again, it's the intergenerational character of them, but you have opportunities to not only present your work, but to get feedback from some of the best scholars in the field at all levels of other people who got the fellowship, former fellowship recipients, and faculty from the National Academy. What an opportunity to get the kind of focused feedback during those retreats. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love being part of the retreat and meeting the new fellows, and really not only spending time in the formally organized slots, but across all the different events, the social events. So we'll go off in a corner and I'll get to meet so-and-so and really help them with their work. So I think it's just one of the best parts of what you can do from being part of this fellowship opportunity. You will be at the end of the retreat, of the fall retreat, and correct me, Abby, if I'm forgetting anything. The first part is for the retreat, but this last part of it overlaps with the annual meeting, and that's where all the fellows, elected fellows from the National Academy, come in. So even if they haven't been part of the formal retreat programming, the last day and a half or 2, you get to eat lunch, breakfast, and dinner, and socialize and engage in conversation with members of the National Academy and other senior scholars that are invited. So that's, to me, just like a dream come true if you're a scholar and wanting to. As one of my former students said, "Oh, my entire lit review is in this room," right? So my own students, former students, have benefited so much from these postdocs, from these fellowships. And it is interesting, if you get a dissertation fellowship, if you track it, and I don't know the new numbers, Abby, but the likelihood of you getting, there's a real overlap, I think, in people getting the postdoc as well, because you've gotten that socialization, you've gotten that feedback, your work is good, and it just positions you for later opportunities. So I think that's one of the best parts about this opportunity. So you also get support for attending AERA. For those of you who don't know, the American Educational Research Association is the largest professional organization for education researchers. So we want you to showcase the work. There is a session devoted for fellows, if you're dissertation fellows and postdocs, so that you're a part of this, so that you're leveraging your work across different venues. And this is really important. This is going to be your community. Even if you are not in education, you're going to be presenting there. I also have to say, as a former president of AERA, that it's another opportunity for you to not only showcase your work, but to get feedback from so many other colleagues. But one of the things I've also observed with my own former students is that they form new communities. And so these are lifelong communities. So they end up co-writing, co-presenting, just staying in touch with their peers in their cohort. So it really is, I just want to underscore, and not being schmaltzy, but it's really true. You are joining and getting a professional family with this experience. Next slide for you, Abby.
Thank you, Kris. Yeah, I would agree that the retreats for the NAEd staff, for the fellows, for the NAEd members, they are a wonderful opportunity. It's just a great networking experience. And the NAEd staff and the Professional Development Committee and the Retreat Planning Committee really work to ask the fellows what they would like to learn about, and we work to bring in appropriate experts for different workshops. So it's an awesome opportunity. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm actually going to just give an overview of the application components. Dr. Gutierrez, feel free to jump in at any point. You have read hundreds of these applications, so please feel free to give your expertise. I will say that details about each application component, word count, format, etc., those are all listed on the NAEd website. They're also listed within the online application. So I just want to put that up there. I'm going to give kind of a broader overview. So first piece is the online application form. Everything is done online, and you'll have to fill out just a normal form. Everything that's required, you have to submit. You won't be allowed to submit without completing that form. Every applicant is required to submit an abstract for their proposed project, and then both dissertation and postdoc applicants are asked to provide a narrative. The narratives are limited to 10 pages for both applications. And I believe the dissertation applicants are allowed 2 pages for a bibliography, and postdoc 1 page for references. I know 10 pages is quite short for your whole dissertation, for a whole new proposed project. We do allow for appendices. However, the reviewers are reading anywhere from 35 to 45 applications in one sitting. So they're not required to read the appendix. So if you want the reviewer to see something, you have a chart, you have some methods you want them to understand, it's really important to include that in the narrative. And the narrative is really where you want to stress, why this project is needed, why this project is important, what it's going to contribute to the field. You'll talk about the methods you selected, how they're going to help answer your research question, why you chose those methods. The narrative is the biggest piece and probably the most difficult piece we get. We get tons of questions on the narrative all the time. The next piece is the personal and career statement. And so as Kris and I have mentioned, we really are looking for applicants that have a demonstrated track record, demonstrated interest in education research. And this is your opportunity to showcase that. So, this is where you can say, this is what's inspired me to go into education research. This is what inspired me to take on this particular project. And this is why I'm the right person for that project. A work plan and timeline. So the dissertation fellowship, because you have a year and it's really supporting the writing phase of the dissertation, we do look closely at the timeline to make sure you'll be able to actually finish your dissertation in the timeline provided. There's actually a specific part of the application that you'll have to fill in. I've seen the timeline submitted month by month over the 12 months of the fellowship, or chapter by chapter. Either option works. What you really want to demonstrate is that you have thought through how you're going to complete your dissertation within that year. There's no required work plan or timeline in the postdoc fellowship. However, most applicants will submit something within the project narrative. So they'll say, I've already collected my data, so for the first, 9 months of the fellowship, I'm going to be doing some writing, and then the last 3 months, I'm going to be doing outreach. But they don't have to have it as structured as the dissertation applicants. Postdoc applicants are also required to submit a sample publication, which is limited to 20 pages. If your sample is more than 20 pages, you can submit a link to the full document. Please make sure that link is not behind a paywall. We just want to make sure that our reviewers can read them. Dissertation fellows are required to submit a graduate transcript, and postdoc fellows are required to submit a current CV. In both, yes, Kris.
There's some questions, Abby, and I'll come back, audience, and talk about some of these aspects in a little bit. So we'll elaborate a little bit more on some of these components. But could you talk a little bit more again? There's some confusion about who is eligible, for which graduate students are eligible for the dissertation. What are the criteria for being eligible to apply for the dissertation?
Sure. For the dissertation fellowship, you'll need to, when you apply, you'll usually be in your second to last year of graduate school. You have to have a project that is related to education research. You can be from any discipline, you can be from any department. We've had people from economics, from history, we've had people in medical schools that have applied and received the fellowship. Really, you just need to be a graduate, you need to be applying for the last year of your graduate education. So we'll fund the, I don't know, usually it's anywhere from 9 to 18 months, however long it takes you, most people 12 months, just we'll fund the writing phase. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Also, I've been trying to answer in the chat, so if it doesn't, please do indicate that in the question and answer.
Oh, I see the question. Is it only for students whose researchers focuses on the education field?
Yeah, I answered that one, I think. So
yeah. Let's see. The final application component, and Kris, this is where your expertise will come in handy as well. Reference letters. So in both instances, we require references. The dissertation fellows are required to submit 2 references, no more, and 1 must be from your director or your chair. And the postdocs are required to submit 3 references, but there are no restrictions on who you can ask. The general advice we give people is to have your references be able to talk to you, your aptitude as a researcher, and to your project, because they want to know that you have support for this project. Kris, can you talk? And we get a ton of questions about the reference letters.
No, that's slide 12. So is it okay if I wait till that slide, and I'll promise to elaborate?
Yep, absolutely. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the application is all online. Everything is automated. So you can start and save your application anytime up until the deadline. The reference letters are also automated. So we encourage you to actually upload the names and email addresses of your references as soon as you start your application. The system will automatically send your references an email with instructions on what should be included in their letter and how to upload it. And when the reference letters are submitted, you will receive a confirmation email that they've been submitted, but you will not be able to access the letters. You'll just know that they've been submitted. It's really important that everything is submitted by the deadline. Next slide, please. So it's really important that everything is submitted by the deadline. It's October 7th for the dissertation fellowship and November 17th for the postdoc fellowship. And the applications close at 5 p.m. Eastern for both fellowships. So that is really important to keep in mind. If you are working on the application at 4:59 and it turns to 5 p.m. and you're not done, the system will lock you out. So we encourage everyone to apply early as possible, because we really can't accept late applications. It's also important to remember that you complete the application in its entirety. Anything that you upload, your CV, your narrative, has to be as a PDF. The system won't accept anything else. And you will receive email updates throughout the application process. So you'll receive reminders you'll receive a notification when you start your application. You'll receive reminders throughout the process. The guidelines for the application are all listed within the online application, and the NAEd staff is very willing to help you out, answer any questions you may have. You can always contact me, or you can contact our program officers, and I'll provide their names as well. We want to make sure we're here supporting you, so please don't hesitate to ask any questions throughout this process. And with that, can we go to the next slide? I'm going to turn it over to Kris.
That's great. Thank you so much. And please don't hesitate to ask questions if we haven't really specified the kind of information you need. We're here to really help you and encourage you to get people to apply. So this is a really important issue. This is like, who is your audience? To whom are you writing, right? And so you need to know and that you are writing to, of course, very established scholars, but who also have a specialization, right? And so it's a committee that is interdisciplinary and should cover all the different kinds of expertise that are represented in the applications. But we're very careful to make sure that you get the best and fair read. It's I've been on these committees for years, very generous committee. And we really try to take that generous approach to reading every single application with the kind of care and respect that it deserves. So if you are a dissertation applicant, automatically we get so many of these applications that it'll be sent out to 2 external reviewers, and the reviewers will be other members of the academy or people who are known for having expertise in the area of your research. So those will automatically go to external reviewers. If you are a postdoc applicant, the committee itself will do the first review, and semifinalists are sent out to external reviewers for additional feedback. And then each committee comes back and really carefully vets all the feedback we've gotten to make recommendations for the final selection. So because it's a general audience, you want to keep reminding that, as one mentor told me, you're kind of make sure you're writing this to a general audience that your grandmother would understand these. Well, not exactly, but clarity is really important, that that the audience is very clear about what you're proposing and what you're doing. So I want to go to the next slide because I think I can specify a little bit more about this. So this is something I tell my own students, my own mentees, about what it means to when you apply for these things. It's a different genre, right? It's a different genre, and you want to put your best foot forward. So you want to locate yourself in a field of study. So for example, I say, I am a critical learning scientist who's interested in the cultural dimensions of learning, right? So right away I've given them some parameters to kind of know how to read me. I see this as a pedagogical task. We're trying to educate people about who we are and what our interests are. So locating yourself, I think, is just one of my preferences and a really important first step. The second one, I think, because we should have this kind of humility, few of us, right, has the groundbreaking Nobel Prize winning kind of study, but even Nobel winners are always building on the work of others, right? So remember, you're joining a conversation and having that spirit. I'm joining the conversation about this issue, but I hope I'm bringing something important, something unique, something interesting to that conversation. Think about it in that way. And I think that's really helpful in writing your narratives. Like, what conversation are you joining? And what do you hope to contribute to it, right? I don't believe in the slash and burn school of thought where I trash everything that comes before me. I think I've tried to build on what's come before me. Even if I don't agree with it, it's helped me understand why I want to do this work and where I fit in. The next one is just one of my most important points, just as a scholar. You want to know the history of ideas. If I'm talking about the construct of resilience, for example, I want to know that, I need to know that there is a whole body of literature in psychology around resilience, which takes an individual perspective on resilience. In my work, I take a more ecological view of resilience. So I want to know that history. I'm not going to have time to really elaborate it a lot, but I also want readers to know that I've done my work and I know that history, so that when I'm taking this ecological approach, it's because I'm responding to this other history of work. So knowing the history of ideas, I just think, is a mark of a good scholar, whether you're applying for something or just writing something. So really, really important. And part of all this is how does your work contribute, right? How will it contribute to the conversation? Why is it important? Why is it consequential? And if this is relevant, will it be useful to policymakers or practitioners, right? So really importantly, as Abby pointed out, the whole application tells us a whole lot. And so you want to think about your recommenders are really important. They should be faculty members. I mean, there's no hard, fast rule, but I find that having other scholars in the field, and faculty members were really probably your best bet for reviewers. So one, you want to choose people who take these letters seriously, who can assess your work, and as Abby said, really can show that they understand your work, because it's another piece of evidence for us to review and say, oh, sometimes they clarify a question we might have. So these reviewers, these letter writers are really important. Make sure they know your work, right? And so you'll have an opportunity to talk about this in your personal statement. You have your research statement and your personal statement. So here's just my advice about the personal statement. How do you use that personal statement to also elaborate your research ideas? So, I could take the approach at my personal statement, say, I was born and raised in the mining town. My father was a copper miner, blah, 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 blah. That's interesting, but it becomes more interesting if I talk about that history and about the history of both inequities and ecological resilience. If I leverage my history to show why I've come to study the things that I am, why they have meaning for me, then you're connecting your own personal story, your own personal history to your history as a researcher. So my own advice, and this is my own bias, is not to just tell me everything about your personal life, but to show how it's implicated in the ways you think about your work, in the topics you choose, in the ways you choose to study, the particular topics that you choose to study. So try to integrate those two, because I think those are the best personal statements. So we learn not only about you, but why learning about you helps us understand the application, the work that you're proposing. Another pet peeve, and I can elaborate on any of these in the Q&A, but one of the other things that I always recommend to applicants is no slow disclosure. Don't take the time the inductive way and tell me all this, and then finally you get to your project. We have many applications to read. You want to make sure we understand. So early on in in that narrative, tell us, what are the important issues? What are the problems you're studying? What are the questions? And don't take the time throughout the essay. Finally, on page 3, we learn what you're doing. So I call it slow disclosure, no slow disclosure. Next slide. So remember again that you're talking to people who have expertise in a particular domain, are good researchers in general, but sometimes we get really kind of lost in our own disciplinary jargon. So I would say to take out jargon, absolutely take out jargon from your applications. And if you feel compelled to use a term, which I often do, I make sure that I define it immediately, right? So that there's no question about what I'm trying to say, because being clear is the most important thing that you can do in this application, including what are the conjectures that I hold? These are the conjectures that I hold that comes from my experience, from the literature, from a history of ideas. These are the conjectures I have in my work, even if I'm a qualitative methodologist, which I am. What are these conjectures? And then how do they lead to really good research questions? And this is where people have a lot of difficulty, because sometimes they confuse the question that animates their whole agenda from the empirical question that they are investigating in their application. So make it really clear what that empirical question is, and that'll make your application that much more salient. I think this is a really important point, is how many people do not specify their methods. It's implied, or there's just a list and we don't get kind of a research plan, a research design, a research plan. So do talk, make sure you're saving space for what is the methodology that you're using and why does it align with the kind of the frame that I bring to this and the kinds of questions that I'm asking. You should also always say, what are the limitations of the research? And of course, if you're doing quantitative work, you'll talk about causal claims, but if you're doing qualitative work, I want to make sure that my question isn't about causal claims, right? So really specifying, and I have a whole rubric that I've designed for the students with whom I work that takes them very carefully through all the questions about methods that you should be addressing in any article and certainly any application. Tell us something about the analytical frames that you'll bring to bear on your analysis. There is a place, a lot of people will talk about theory. Here's my own 2 cents about theory, is that people will say, I have these 10 theoretical frameworks that I'm dealing with. And of course, that's not very useful. So you want to show the commitments that you have in your work. So I will say, for example, that I'm anchored in a cultural historical view of learning and development, but that I bring other analytical frames from other disciplinary areas to expand the lenses that I use for my work. So think very carefully about how to do it in a crisp way that we really know how to locate you, and we're very clear about the methods and the theory and the analytical frames that you bring to your work. And then a timeline that, of course, you can't do a longitudinal study for this. You can do a part of it, but clearly make sure that your timeline matches what you can actually carry out in the fellowship. I don't know if there are questions, but we'll come back to that. Next slide. So this is going to sound like a no-brainer, but people I know who are applying for these fellowships start as early as the summer. You cannot pull this off at the last minute because you want to get lots and lots of feedback. I'm the revision queen, so I revise, continually. So I want to have multiple drafts. I want to get lots of feedback. I want to read applications from former fellows. I want to pay attention to the website and say who's been funded, what kinds of topics. I want to get as much information as I can as I sit down to do this work. So you cannot start too early. Give yourself time. If you're advising people, please tell them to take the time to get lots of feedback and do multiple drafts. And then to reach out if they have any kinds of questions. But as Abby says here, do not call the NAEd office on the due date. Their website and their phone calls are just off the charts. So please get your feedback early on. And Abby, I think the next one is yours.
Actually, I think can you go to the next slide? This is really just a wrap up of the tips that Kris, that you've talked about already. I don't know if there's anything on here you wanted to elaborate on. I think you've touched on all of this though. And
you know what I can add, Abby, is this is a language I use. Is there a good so what question? Have I formulated a question that when somebody reads and says, like, what's the so what? So I think you want to think about consequential questions, a good so what question that is also an empirical question. That's really important, right? And that'll help drive the way you're thinking about your work. The relevant literature, I think, is about making sure I know the history of ideas in that. You cannot, of course, be so comprehensive, you're going to cover everything, but you do want to show that you know that you're joining a conversation, what that conversation was, what the relevant issues were, and what the most salient work is in that area, right? And so you don't also want it to be so boutique-y that we say, well, what connection does it have to larger issues? So I know this is a lot, you're leveraging a lot, but it's very doable. But it's really important to think about all these tips because they've been successful for other applicants.
you. And now we'll open it up for questions. Please use the Q&A box. Don't hesitate. Ask away. Ask anything. And again, if we can't get to it within the hour, we will follow up via email. But I do have a couple that have shown up. I have had a couple people ask, will the recording be available later? Yes. We will email a copy of the recording and the slides to the registrants, and I will talk to my colleagues about putting it up on the NAEd website. A question about the postdoc fellowship. This is a question we get quite a bit. Is it the salary replacement for university salary? If so, how does that work when distributed for 2 years? So the postdoc, the $70,000 would be sent in 2 checks. So your institution would receive a $75,000 check for each semester that you take off. So whenever you, when you get the fellowship, once you figure out which semesters you'll be off, you'll work with the NAEd program officer who will figure out your timeline. So that'll say your institution will receive check 1 on X date, and then on X date 2 is when you'll need to submit your midterm report, and then on X date 3 is when we'll send your next check to the institution. We'll work with you and your financial officer to make sure that we have all the correct information. Let's see. Kris, there's a question here I hope you can talk to. It asks about the dissertation fellowship, but I think it applies to both. Do you consider publications for the dissertation for the students, specifically looking at numbers and quality?
So, I mean, clearly a past record helps us understand the kind of experience and expertise that this person has coming to this topic. I think they're much, much more relevant at the postdoc level for the postdoctoral fellowships, because these are already people who've been in the field and should have a demonstrated record of scholarship. We don't quantify them. We don't say there's a threshold. You have to have so many, but clearly people who have had experience producing, contributing to the knowledge base as postdoc applicants. I think that's just expected. But dissertation fellows, more and more, a lot of the dissertation fellows have articles, a lot of them with their advisors. But I think, in the spirit of wanting to, there's a lot of inequity across institutions and the kind of mentorship and opportunities. So I think we're trying to be very careful too, to say, yes, it's wonderful, but has this person had the opportunity for that kind of mentorship? So I don't think nobody would be disqualified as a dissertation applicant if they didn't have journal articles. Many do, but I think we're trying to be really mindful about the context as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so. If it wasn't answered, please feel free to follow up in the chat. We had a question. I can respond to this one. For the 10-page narrative, is the reference included in that 10 pages? No. You are allowed 10 pages for your content, and then your reference, your bibliography would be separate. So 10 pages of content. Again, it's not a lot, but we ask that you keep it at 10 pages just so our reviewers aren't too overwhelmed.
So I'm not real clear. Maybe the person asking this question can help me understand is like, what kind of writing projects are within the scope?
Yeah.
So the project is not to complete the book. It's not, the fellowship is not for the venue in which you're going to place this research. It is for you to do the writing portion, the analysis, the write-up of the study. Now, many people will say, I'm doing it in a way that it's going to be, I'm like any good researcher, here's an article. But we don't really look at it for, are they going to produce a book? Are they going to produce a journal article? You want to say what you're going to do with it. It's really about the quality and the consequentiality of the research that you're doing, how it's designed, right? And can you carry it out? That's what we look for. And then we will say, oh, this is a good venue for disseminating this information. But that's really at the other part of the process.
Right. That same question did specifically ask about if it's a book project, do you need to have a contract? No, you do not. We've had historians that have used the fellowship to collect data for a longer term book project, but they don't have a contract at that point, the point when they apply.
You know, the goal of this program is to really give people an opportunity to be the kind of thoughtful and consequential researchers that we think should be part of the field and the academy. That's really the goal.
We had another question about, is this for students whose research focuses on the education field? So we want to make sure we're very clear about this. This is for education-focused projects, education-focused researchers in any field. So as Kris mentioned, you can be a sociologist, but study sociology of education. Kris, can you elaborate on that? Because we've had several questions about that, and we usually get those via email quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many historians we always give fellowships to. So that should kind of rupture the notion that these are only for education researchers. So someone once said, we don't want to fund educational research. We want to fund good research across disciplines that addresses thoughtfully educational problems, educational issues. So I think that's a really important distinction. This is not a program for educational researchers, right? It could include people from education. Obviously, most of our people come from there, but it really encourages people from the disciplines who really are bringing their expertise to bear on an educational phenomenon, an educational issue. So do not let this deter you. If you look at the list of past awardees, you'll see how interdisciplinary it is and how important that is in our conversations. Because if I'm there and an historian helps me see, oh, this is how an historian would read this, and these are the questions they have, it just makes me a better researcher. So we want that heterogeneous group of people to be part of the cohort of these fellowships.
And the NAEd staff will get questions several times. You know, here's a synopsis of my project. Is this something the committee would consider? I think I've only had one time where I've had to say it's something that they wouldn't consider because it just was not at all related to education. It was a chemistry project, but that's the only time that has ever happened. So the committee really wants to take a broad view. Let's see. There's a question here. I would have to be out of the field on my dissertation research before the start of the fellowship. I'm not quite sure if you can clarify what you're asking there. I'm wondering, like, if you're an anthropologist collecting something in the field, you would need to be back in writing by the time you start the fellowship. So normally when dissertation fellows apply, it's while they're collecting data. And then when they come back and start writing is when the fellowship would begin. Most dissertation fellowships would begin in June, but there is leeway. You know, if you're not done with your data collection, we can help you start maybe September or October, but that's on a case-by-case basis. You would work with the program officer.
So I just want to clarify that absolutely, but much of our research is also iterative, so that while the expectation is that you are ready to write. Obviously, most of us are writing as we're collecting data. And also many of us will say, I have to continue. I'm going to because it's iterative, I have to go back and do more interviews. I'm going to go back to the field. That absolutely makes sense,
Yes.
right? Because that's part of my research design that while I've done the bulk of it, there are many times where I'm going to come back into and re-engage in data collection, but in that very strategic kind of way. So it does not mean you can't do that in your approach. In fact, that's kind of normative in good research, to be iterative.
And I will mention for the dissertation fellowship, if you make it to the semifinalist round, dissertation applicants do have the opportunity to submit any changes to their application. So if their timeline has changed from what they originally submitted, they can make a change. If any of their methods have shifted slightly, they can submit that for the committee to consider in the last application rate. The postdoc applicants, unfortunately, do not get that opportunity. Once you apply with the postdoc, you don't have an opportunity to change your application. Are there any other questions? Yes, we will record this webinar. We will send it out on Monday with the slides. I'm not seeing anything else come through. Can we go to the next slide? So if you think of anything over the weekend, next week, anytime, you can feel free to email me. I will be happy to answer any questions about your application, any questions in general about the fellowship. The NAEd staff, again, we really want to make sure we're supporting our applicants. So if you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out. We really love working with applicants, love working with the fellows. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
I just really encourage people to apply. Just the exercise of going through this, it's a win-win, because it's an opportunity to clarify your ideas, to codify them in ways for an external audience. I think it's just a win-win opportunity. So we would love to see more applicants, especially from the schools that you represent. I really encourage you to. We are really committed to the kind of methodological, theoretical, disciplinary, and diversity, and also representation from racial and ethnic groups. It's a really important commitment in the foundation, Spencer, as well as the National Academy.
Thank you. And with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Gutierrez, thank all of our participants. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you so much.